Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shekalim. We are up to Perek Chet, Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. According to biblical law, any parts of Kodshei Kodashim offerings, the most holy offerings, such as the Olah, Chatat, and Asham, now these are called most holy because their laws are stricter than Kodashim Kalim, offerings of lesser holiness, such as Shelamin, Pesach, Bechor, and Maaser. Now again, according to biblical law, any parts of Kodshei Kodashim offerings that become disqualified must be burned inside the temple courtyard. Now there was a special area in the courtyard designated for burning disqualified offerings. This includes meat that became tameh. However, in certain cases, the rabbis suspended this obligation and decreed that tameh meat be burned outside the courtyard so as to avoid bringing tumah onto the temple grounds or keeping it there. The next two Mishnayot discuss when tameh meat is burned inside the courtyard and when it is burned outside. The Mishnah begins, Bisar Kodshei Kodashim Shenitma. The rule for meat of Kodshei Kodashim that became tameh, ben be'ava tumah, ben bivlada tumah, whether it became tameh through contact with the primary source of tumah that makes it biblically tameh, or through contact with a secondary tumah that makes the meat tameh only by rabbinic law. For example, the meat came into contact with a utensil that had touched the tameh beverage. Since a beverage can make utensil tameh only by rabbinic law, the meat carries only rabbinic tumah, ben bifnim, ben bachutz, and whether the tumah contamination occurred inside or outside the temple courtyard, the halakha is as follows. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Hakol Yisaref Bifnim. In all of these cases, the contaminated meat should be burned inside the courtyard, even though doing so will mean that the meat has to be brought into the courtyard or kept there for longer. Chutz mishenitma ba'ava tumah b'chutz, except for meat that became tameh through contact with the primary source of tumah outside the courtyard. Since that meat is biblically tameh and it is now outside the courtyard, we may not bring it inside. Rather, we must burn it. We burn it outside the courtyard. Now, there are two reasons not to bring meat back into the courtyard and burn it there. A, it's high level of tumah which should not be brought into the temple courtyard. And B, the fact that the tumah occurred outside the courtyard. According to Bet Shammai, the meat is burnt outside the courtyard only when both of these reasons apply. In all other cases where one or neither of these factors is present, the meat must be burned in its designated place inside the courtyard. Bet Hillel omrim, but Bet Hillel say Hakol Yisaref b'chutz. In all of these cases, the contaminated meat should be burned outside the courtyard, so as not to bring tumah into the temple grounds or hold it there. Chutz mishenitma bivlada tumah bifnim, except for meat that it became tameh through contact with a secondary tumah inside the courtyard. Since in this case, the meat is only rabbinically tameh, and in addition to that, it is already inside the courtyard, it is not necessary to remove it before burning it, and the meat should therefore be burned in the temple courtyard. Bet Hillel's opinion is that tameh meat should not be brought into the temple courtyard or kept there if either of the two factors is present. Therefore, if the meat became tameh outside the courtyard, it should not be returned there, regardless of its level of tumah. And even if it became tameh inside the courtyard, it should not be kept there to be burned if it is biblically tameh. Only where the meat became tameh from a secondary tumah and the contamination actually occurred within the courtyard walls, so that no tumah need be brought in, do we burn the meat in the courtyard. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin now continues the discussion that we began about where to burn sacrificial meat that became tameh. It cites two more opinions. Rabbi Eliezer says, Et shenitma ba'ava tumah, meat that became tameh through contact with the primary tumah that makes it tameh on a biblical level, ben bifnim, ben bachutz, whether it became tameh inside or outside the temple courtyard, yisaref bachutz. It should be burned outside the courtyard so that we not bring anything biblically tameh into the courtyard or even leave it there long enough to burn. Vet shenitma bevlada tumah, and meat that became tameh through contact with a secondary tumah, making it only rabbinically tameh, ben bifnim, ben bachutz, whether it became tameh inside or outside the courtyard, yisaref bifnim, it should be burned inside the courtyard in its proper place. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, everything depends upon only one factor, the severity of the tumah. If the tumah is biblical, the burning may not take place in the courtyard, even if that is where it became tameh in the first place. And if the tumah is rabbinic, having been contracted from a secondary tumah, the burning takes place inside the courtyard no matter where the contamination occurred. Rabbi Akiva says, Mekom tumato sham srefato. Wherever it became tameh, there it is burned. If it became tameh inside the courtyard, it is burned there. Even if it is biblically tameh, if it became tameh outside the court, it is burned there. Even if it is only rabbinically tameh. According to Rabbi Akiva, takes into account only the consideration of where the meat became tameh. The severity of the tumah makes no difference in his opinion. Now, in summary, the article stated in note 2 summarizes, according to Bet Shammai, tameh meat is always burned inside unless the tumah is severe and occurred outside. According to Bet Hillel, the meat is always burned outside unless the tumah is light and occurred inside. According to Rabbi Eliezer, if the tumah is severe, the meat is burned outside. If not, it is burned inside. According to Rabbi Akiva, the meat is always burned where it became tameh. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.